Hi, everyone. Welcome to a deep dive into FRAC's new school meal participation reports, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, Communications Manager at FRAC. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 45 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, select Show Captions in the bottom taskbar and choose English as the spoken language. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. To ask a question at any time during the webinar, please use the Q&A tab in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Clarissa Hayes, Deputy Director of Child Nutrition Programs and Policy. Take it away, Clarissa.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today for our webinar. We are very excited for today's conversation. FRAC in the last month, and actually just today, we've released 2 reports that look at participation in school breakfast and school lunch, and we are just thrilled to be able to dive into these findings with you here today and answer any questions that you have. So really the goal of today is to share a big picture of the findings that our reports have, what the data means, and then also some resources that hopefully you can use to increase access to school meals in your state. So I know we only have 45 minutes together today, so let's go ahead and dive in, and we'll go to the next slide, which has a very brief agenda. So we're covering the welcome right now, but just in a way of introductions, like Steve said, my name is Clarissa Hayes, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Child Nutrition Programs and Policy team here at FRAC. And I pulled together the first report that we'll be talking about, which is the reach of school breakfast and lunch during the 22 to 23 school year. And then I'm very excited to be joined today by my colleague, Alexis Bylander, who's the Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst and Healthy School Meals for All Campaign Senior Manager. And she will be providing an overview of our other report that was published late last month, and that is the State of Healthy School Meals for All. California, Maine, Massachusetts, Nevada, and Vermont lead the way. And then we want to make sure that we leave enough time at the end for any questions that you have. So as we go through, like Steve mentioned, feel free to add any questions you have to the Q&A box, and we will make sure to address those at the end. So I think with that, we can go ahead and just dive in. Before we get to the actual findings, we just wanted to level set a little bit about why we wanted to pull this webinar together and why we think data is such a powerful tool when it comes to the school nutrition programs, and why we hope these are helpful to you and your work that you do in your state and in your community. So really, we hope these reports, obviously, they show where your state stands with reaching students with breakfast and lunch. So it really gives that snapshot of where you're at and where your state could be in reaching kids with these meals. We also think that data can provide a really key opportunity for engagement and advocacy. So it opens up the door for opportunities to raise awareness and potentially engage elected officials and other stakeholders in coming to the table to help grow momentum around these really critical programs. It can also help you to target and set expansion goals. So once you know where you're at with these programs, you can set some goals of progress that you want to make over the next couple of years. And then really the report is meant to highlight best practices and opportunities for increasing participation. Obviously, we know that those are different for every state and every community, but we do our best to highlight those and make them accessible to all. So we are very excited to be talking today. We love data, we love our reports, so we can go ahead and dive into the first one we'll be talking about, like I mentioned, which is the reach of school breakfast and lunch during the 22-23 school year. And we have been releasing this report for many, many years, long before I came to FRAC. It used to be called our school breakfast scorecard, if you're familiar with that, during the pandemic. Just because of data changes and limitations, we did go ahead and tweak the name so we can better address the fact that we are looking at both school breakfast and school lunch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a very brief overview of where we get our data and the methodology that we use. And then I'll dive into some key report findings, and then last but not least, a few recommendations before I turn it over to Alexis to do the same for her report. So moving on. So this may be way more information than you want or care about, but just quickly, overall, what does this report highlight? So this report looks at state and national total average daily participation in school breakfast compared to school lunch. We also provide total breakfast and lunches served. So if you're interested in that over average daily participation, we have you covered. And then we also take a look at the number of schools participating, and how we do that is we actually compare the number of schools doing school breakfast to the number of schools doing school lunch as a comparison, because really we want to make sure that the same schools are serving both programs on the same day. So we do receive our data from USDA, and we request total number of breakfasts and lunches served through the available programs. And usually for every normal year, this is through the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program. I think anyone who's been following the child nutrition programs over the last couple of years know that there have been waivers that allowed schools to serve meals through other program options, including the seamless summer option last year, or the 21-22 school year. And then even summer food service program was an option for some of those COVID years. So for these 2 years, we have the programs that were running during that time period, and we just wanted to be really transparent with where these meals are coming from. And then on our end, we do some additional data analysis to get the numbers that we include in the report. So to keep it very high level, and if anyone wants to talk more about this, I would be happy to connect, but we basically find the average daily participation by taking breakfast and lunches served, and then we divide that by each state's operating days or service days for the year. And then we do apply an attendance factor to account for any child who may be absent on a certain day, and it just helps to account for that. And then in the report, we don't lean as heavily into it this year as we normally do, but really FRAC has a participation goal of ensuring that 70 children are receiving a school breakfast for every 100 receiving a school lunch. And we really just have that goal because breakfast has traditionally always trailed behind lunch, and we want to make sure that children have access to both of those meals and that they're both critical to their health and learning and well-being. One thing I'll add here before we move on is that we are looking at total participation, and before the pandemic, we really honed in on free and reduced price participation, but just because of data limitations and the fact that for the 21-22 school year, all meals were basically served at the free rate, there's not the same ability to compare free and reduced price participation, but we are hoping that next year when data and programs are back to normal, we'll have that data comparison to share if that is a data point that you're more interested in. All right. So next slide. So here are some of the key findings that we're going to talk about. And before I really dive into this, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit. I'm sure everyone knows what was happening during the 22-23 school year, but just as a quick refresher, this was the first time since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic where school breakfast and school lunch returned to normal operations. So as everyone I'm sure was aware, from about March 2020 through June 2022, schools could serve all meals or offer meals at no charge to all students, and those waivers did expire. So 22-23 was really the first year in 3 years where schools were going back to that tiered eligibility system where they were collecting and processing and verifying school meal applications. And we know that millions of children did lose access to the free school meals that they had been receiving since March 2020. And the impact of that, as you will see, is really clear in the data, but just wanted to provide that level setting before we dive in. So on a whole, 14.3 million children received a school breakfast on an average day in the 22-23 school year. And then of that 14.3 million, about 11.3 million were receiving a free or reduced price breakfast. So still a majority were receiving a meal either under the free or reduced price category. And then on the lunch side, we had just over 28.1 million children receiving a school lunch on an average day during that same time period, with about 19.7 million receiving a free or reduced price lunch. So as you can see here on the right hand of the slide here, there was a drop in both breakfast and lunch. So for breakfast, compared to the year before, the 21-22 school year, about 1.2 million fewer children, or 7.7% drop, were not receiving a breakfast. And then on the lunch side, we had about a 1.8 million children decrease, or 6%. So both programs from year to year did see a decrease in participation when those nationwide waivers expired. Next slide. All right, so this slide here is, it's a little hard to see, and it really just shows that there was full maximization of the waivers when they were available, but this shows breakfast participation by fee category for both the 21-22 school year and the 22-23 school year. So for 21-22, you can see that for the most part, all breakfasts were served at the free rate. There might be like a tiny smidge of paid in there, but it's so small you can barely see it. And then as we moved into the 22-23 school year, you can see that not only did average daily participation drop overall, but you start to see those patterns of the free, reduced price, and paid makeup starting to reemerge, which is only natural because we had to go back to that system, but you can just see the breakdown of those meals. All right, next slide. And then the same is visible for lunch. So in the 21-22 school year, all meals except for a very tiny amount were served under the free category through the waivers. And then as we move to the 22-23 school year, the free, reduced price, and paid tiered system starts to reemerge. So you can see that not only was there a drop, but we also have that more visible. All right, next slide. So what do we see on the state level? So let's talk about breakfast first. So what we found in our report is that 42 states and the District of Columbia experienced a decrease in breakfast participation in the 22-23 school year compared to the 21-22 school year. So only 8 states saw an increase in participation during that time period. And you can see those 8 states here on the left of your screen. So California, Kentucky, Maine, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Vermont all had increases in participation. And on the right is an explanation of why we think that is. So as you can see, 4 of these states, so California, Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont, enacted what we call Healthy School Meals for All policies for the 22-23 school year. And I won't talk too much about this because Alexis is going to cover this, but that meant that those schools, even though the nationwide waivers had expired, those schools were still able to provide meals at no charge. So what we're seeing is that they were able to maintain and even grow their participation because of that legislation or those policies. And then for Kentucky and North Carolina and Texas, we saw some higher than usual CEP participation, or more schools just opting into CEP, which we think helped them to maintain that momentum. And then Pennsylvania was a little unique, where they passed state breakfast legislation for that year, which is why we think that also helped them maintain that participation. So again, 42 states and DC saw a drop, and then only 8 states had an increase in breakfast participation. So let's go on to lunch. So weirdly enough, these numbers match up, although it is a bit different of a state makeup here. So again, 42 states and DC experienced a drop in lunch participation, and we had 8 states that saw an increase. So California, Connecticut, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Vermont. And again, of these 8 states, you'll see that the 4 who were doing Healthy School Meals for All legislations during that school year were able to grow participation. And then where we saw the rest of the states really fit in is because they had high CEP participation, or they had a relatively large increase in the number of schools that were doing CEP. So what we're seeing here is that this legislation and the take up of CEP really did make a difference once those waivers went away. Next slide. All right, so the last, data measure that I'll talk about here before going into some of our data recommendations is we do in the report compare breakfast participation to lunch, because lunch is a really great benchmark for where we want breakfast to be. And like I mentioned earlier, breakfast has always trailed lunch, and a lot of the barriers that we saw pre-pandemic are starting to reemerge. At least that's what the data is telling us. So during the 21 to 22 school year, 51.9 children received a school lunch for every 100 receiving, a school breakfast for every 100 receiving a school lunch. And then in the 22 to 23 school year, we do see that ratio decrease a bit. So we have 50.9 children receiving a school breakfast for every 100 receiving a school lunch. So the gap between school breakfast and school lunch, it had started to narrow a bit during the pandemic, but we are starting to see that widen again. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we do have a benchmark that we hope states are able to make, which is that they reach 70 kids with breakfast for every 100 that get a lunch. And during this last school year, only DC and West Virginia were able to meet that benchmark. All right, so that was the data. Again, if you do have any questions on that, I know Maria has been, yes, go West Virginia. I know Maria has been putting the report into the chat, so feel free to take a look at that data, and if you have any questions, happy to answer it. But really, the last key piece of this report that we just want to quickly highlight is some of the recommendations that we include. So the first one, and again, I am not going to talk about this too much because Alexis has it covered, but obviously the data is showing us that healthy school meals for all on the state and the federal level could be a game changer, and allowing schools to offer meals at no charge can really help increase participation in both school breakfast and school lunch. The next recommendation that we have is that it is key to maximize community eligibility and ensure that all eligible schools and school districts participate. So we talk about this in the report, but in October 2023, USDA did release a final rule that provides 3,000 additional school districts the opportunity to offer nutritious meals to all students at no cost by lowering the eligibility threshold from 40% identified students to 25%. So we really do see maximizing CEP as an important strategy for healthy school meals for all for schools and states. The third one here is improving certification processes. So we know that increasing the number of children from households with low incomes who are directly certified to receive free school meals without an application would ensure more eligible children do not fall through the cracks. One way is through the Medicaid Direct Certification Pilot, which as of, I think, 2 weeks ago, 43 states are participating in that, and there will be another option for states who aren't to do so next school year, or 24 to 25 school year. And the last thing here is implementing innovative breakfast models, which we'll talk a little bit more on the next slide. So like I mentioned earlier, we know that a lot of the barriers that existed before the pandemic began to reemerge with the end of the nationwide waivers. And a lot of that was related to breakfast participation. So we know that for many students, there can be stigma around participating in school breakfast. The timing of it could just not work with bus schedules or getting to school. The location and being able to access it may not work. And then, of course, we know the cost is another barrier. And then on the operations side, we know that staffing can be a limitation, menu availability, especially with some of the shortages that we've seen over the last couple of years, and just having the support to run a robust school breakfast program can be challenging. So fortunately, there are identified best practices that can help increase the reach of school breakfast. And we really see this going hand in hand with any policy or legislative changes that happen to states. So we really know that taking breakfast out of the cafeteria and serving it after the bell can help eliminate a lot of those barriers that I mentioned. And I won't spend too much time on this because we have some really great resources, but there are 3 really innovative service models when we think about breakfast that can really help to move the needle. So the first is breakfast in the classroom, which is when meals are delivered to and eaten in the classroom at the start of the school day. So taking it out of the cafeteria and bringing it to where students are. There's grab and go, which is when children can quickly grab their breakfast from carts or kiosks in the hallway or the cafeteria line to eat in their classroom or in common areas. And then last but not least, second chance breakfast, which is when students are offered a second chance to eat breakfast after the school day starts. And many middle and high school students are not hungry, as we know, first thing in the morning, but are ready to eat breakfast after their first class of the day. So we have many resources on these program options. We'll share some more at the end. But again, we really see recommitting to these innovative service models a key part of the strategy in increasing participation in school breakfast. So I think that's it for me, except to say one last thing to tout school breakfast a little bit more. We know from some communication that USDA issued last year in 2023 that they said over 40% of students who had never participated in school breakfast would do so if eating in the classroom was an option. So just a little data point to leave you with here with a graphic showing the benefits of breakfast in the classroom. But if you have any additional questions, we are happy to answer those. And I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alexis to cover our next report, which really digs into more what we're seeing in those states that have the Healthy School Meals for All policies. So Alexis, floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Clarissa, and good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about FRAC's first report on Healthy School Meals for All policies. The title is The State of Healthy School Meals for All, California, Maine, Massachusetts, Nevada, and Vermont Lead the Way. And this is really kind of a call-out report because it uses the same data and methodology that is used in the Reach of School Breakfast and Lunch report that Clarissa just walked through. So this is based on data that state child nutrition agencies submitted to USDA. We got the information from USDA, used a formula to figure out average daily participation, and then shared the report findings with the state child nutrition agencies for the states in the report and gave them an opportunity to flag any corrections that were needed. So Steve, if you'll go to the next slide, I wanted to just review how we landed on including these 5 states. So this is a map of Healthy School Meals for All policies that we keep up to date on our website, freeschoolmealsforall.org. And it's just so exciting to look at the progress that is being made on this issue. So as a reminder, California and Maine in green were the first states to pass Healthy School Meals for All policies. And so they are included in the report. They started implementing last school year. Vermont and Massachusetts first passed year-long Healthy School Meals for All policies for last school year before they passed a policy that made free school meals for all part of their state environment going out into the future. So Vermont and Massachusetts are also included in the report. And then Nevada used COVID relief funds to provide 2 years of free school meals for all students. They're in the blue and they're also included in the report. So those 5 states had Healthy School Meals for All policies being implemented last school year. I also want to call out that New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, and Michigan have since passed Healthy School Meals for All policies. They started this current school year, 2023 to 2024, and they will be in our report next year. All right, so next slide. Now I wanted to talk about the school years that we are comparing in this report. And the school nutrition programs have really been on a wild ride in the last handful of years. So just as a refresher, school year 2018-2019 was back at a time that we now refer to as pre-pandemic operations, where the school nutrition programs were operating with tiered eligibility, free, reduced priced, and paid. Unless it was a CEP school. All right, in school year 2019-2020, it was business as usual until the pandemic hit in March 2020. And at that time, USDA provided waivers, allowing schools to offer free school meals to all students, regardless of household income. And those pandemic waivers were in place for the remainder of that school year and then the next 2 school years. So last school year 2022 to 2023, was the first time that schools either went back to quote unquote normal operations, qualifying students for the different meal categories, or if they were a Healthy School Meals for All state, that was their first year of implementation. So this report is looking at the first year of Healthy School Meals for All implementation in comparison to 2018-2019, which was pre-pandemic operations. Next slide. So I just wanted to share a couple of highlights from the report, but the top line message is that this is a story of success. School lunch participation in all 5 states increased during the 2022 to 2023 school year compared to pre-pandemic levels. Next slide. School breakfast participation increased in 4 of the 5 states, all of the states except for Nevada. Next slide. In chart 1 in the report, we show specifically the increases in lunch and the increases in breakfast, except for Nevada, on a state-by-state level with the individual, or with the average daily participation rates for each state. Next slide. And the 5 Healthy School Meals for All states continued to have a gap between breakfast and lunch participation, showing that there is still room for growth in the school breakfast program. And that really reiterates what Clarissa was talking about, is that for the amount of students that are participating in lunch, the participation in breakfast is still less. And so using innovative service models like breakfast in the classroom, grab and go kiosks throughout the school, and second chance breakfast could really help increase those participation rates. Next slide. This was probably my favorite part of the report, and that is the finding that the response to Healthy School Meals for All policies has been positive, with state child nutrition agencies noting many benefits to providing school meals at no cost to all families, and public opinion polling showing broad support. On the next slide, you can see in a call-out box in the report, we asked state child nutrition agencies to check the box next to all of the benefits that we expected to see with Healthy School Meals for All. And those included reducing childhood hunger, making it easier for parents and guardians, eliminating stigma associated with school meals, easing administrative work, supporting academic achievement, eliminating school meal debt, improving school student behavior, supporting food and nutrition service finances, increasing the number of fruits, vegetables, and milk that students consume, advancing racial equity, and improving staff morale and job satisfaction. You can see that no benefit listed there is without at least several states saying that they saw those benefits in their state with the passage of these policies. Next. There are 2 quotes included in the report that I just wanted to highlight, and this is from a parent in Massachusetts during the pandemic when meals were being offered for free through waivers. They said, "Prior to the pandemic, I struggled with school meal debt. It felt like we were drowning. Despite being a single mother, my income was relatively decent. Therefore, my daughter didn't qualify for free or reduced price school meals, yet high housing and healthcare costs consumed the majority of my income." And this is a story from one person that really represents a problem for many people, which is that the threshold to qualify for free or reduced price meals is incredibly low. And there are many people above that cutoff that are in need of free school meals, but are not getting them in states without policies. Next slide. And then the California Department of Education just emailed in a quote that was too good to not include in it. They said, "Healthy School Meals for All helps to remove stigma of school meals, eliminate school meal debt, increase access to healthy, complete meals, and elevate the importance of school nutrition and culinary professionals, and the essential role that school meals and food service has in a holistic educational programming for student achievement." So a big endorsement for this type of policy. Next slide. So there is clearly the most momentum for Healthy School Meals for All at the state level, but we also want to see action on the federal level as well, because kids in every state should have access to free school meals for all as a part of their school day. So FRAC is supportive of the following pieces of federal legislation: the Universal School Meals Program Act, which would make free school meals for all a reality nationwide; the School Meals Expansion Act, which would increase the CEP multiplier from 1.6 to 2.5, and that would be a game changer for CEP schools in all states, and would also certainly help the viability of Healthy School Meals for All state policies. The next piece is No Hungry Kids in School Act, which would make it possible for states to do CEP statewide instead of grouping within districts. And then Expanding Access to School Meals Act, which would increase eligibility for free school meals to 200% of the poverty level. So those are all pieces of legislation that we are lobbying for in Congress and hope to see become a reality. Next slide. So this report and other resources that we have available are at freeschoolmealsforall.org, and happy to answer questions here or via email later. But thank you so much for joining today.
All right, thank you, Alexis. Yes, we have been, Maria has been adding links to the chat, so feel free to access any of the pieces that we've been talking about today. And then I don't think I see any questions actually have come in, which must mean we're very thorough. But let me go ahead, we'll go to the next slide that outlines some of the resources. And I do see that we have a question that came in, so we can try to answer that. So afterwards, we will be sending around the slides and the recording. I also wanted just to share that both of these reports are obviously on our website. If you are interested in learning more about the bills that Alexis outlined, we have those on our FRAC action page with the bills we're supporting. We have a really wonderful brief on the case for healthy school meals for all. Our school breakfast page includes expansion strategies, so talking about those innovative breakfast models that I went over earlier. And then we are gearing up for CEP season. So if you are working in a state or if you're a school partner that's curious about CEP, we have calculators to see if it makes sense for you, how to group your schools, all those good things. We have a colleague at FRAC, Erin Heisom, who can walk you through those different tools. So please reach out to us if you do have any questions about CEP, because like we mentioned, this is really a key pathway to healthy school meals for all. So I see some questions here around portion size for breakfast and lunch. So I think we would love to connect with that person afterwards and just learn a little bit more about that. And now they're all coming in. So let's just take a second and we can read these. And then Alexis, if you see any that you want to address, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I can jump in. And just to say, I too have heard about the portion size question and was in a meeting recently where someone brought that up to USDA. So I know that they are aware of it, but I don't know of any plans to address it right now. I think our focus with Healthy School Meals for All policies is just ensuring that the first meal is offered free to everyone. But I think you flag another issue to address. For the question about, do we have any information about the challenges that school nutrition programs are facing in Healthy School Meals for All states? Or excuse me, for financial implications that SFAs have experienced with Healthy School Meals for All. I think we don't have any compiled materials on that yet, and we're still kind of learning as this policy is relatively new. I do think what we have learned so far is that participation is in general exceeding expectations, even high estimates of what participation would look like. And I think we have a lot of learning still to do about the best way to advise schools to participate in CEP or Provision 2 to maximize federal reimbursements. And I also saw a question of the federal bills, which ones do you think are most likely to pass? I think the Universal School Meals Program Act is our big vision bill. Like that's what we ultimately want to see accomplished. I think what's most likely to pass before that and would still be a very big lift is increasing the CEP multiplier from 1.6 to 2.5. So I think the School Meals Expansion Act is probably likely to pass first, but still will take incredible effort to get across the finish line. Clarissa, I'll turn it back over to you to see if you've picked up on any other questions in the chat.
Yeah, so we have some resources that were mentioned, so thanks for that. I know Alexis mentioned the federal bills, which we have on our website. I know we have a question about participation in Nevada and any challenges that Healthy School Meals for All states are experiencing, which I think Alexis mentioned or covered the first part of that question. And then as for Nevada, like we said, they did have an increase in lunch. There was a slight drop in breakfast. We do know from the state that there were some enrollment changes from year to year, which could have accounted for that. But I think that's something that we're still hoping to dig into a little bit more. And then we do have a question about CNR, which yeah, we can give an update on that. So, you know, Farm Bill seems to be front of mind right now. CNR has been, seems to be tabled until that's done. We like to say at FRAC, though, never say never, but it isn't looking likely that that would happen, at least in the short term. So that's the update that I have, although I know FRAC's website has a more thorough update on CNR, but I do know that Farm Bill and other priorities are definitely in the forefront at this moment. And then Alexis, there was a question in Maryland about how there's a study instead of the bill. I don't know if you have any insight that you want to share on that.
Yeah, so I just talked to Julia at Maryland Hunger Solutions about this yesterday, and I don't know if she is on this webinar or not, but I wanted to say I think it is a big disappointment that Healthy School Meals for All wasn't able to get across the finish line in Maryland again this year. There's such a strong coalition there and such good work being done on this issue. I think, do we need more information to prove that kids are hungry? They have a hard time learning when their stomachs aren't full? No. I think the evidence is very clear and already exists for Healthy School Meals for All. I think sometimes studies can be used, though, as a good tactic to keep the issue alive and to keep it in everyone's mind. And this is going to be a relatively short study if it passes. So the coalition could be ready to go with legislation again next session. So I'm hopeful that the coalition stays strong. If the study passes, it just does nothing but help the issue, and that maybe it can get across the finish line next year.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. And I think you might have addressed this, but there was a question about what advocates can do to support the legislation for the federal bills. So on that bills we're supporting page, we always want more co-sponsors on these bills. I know there's Alexis leads a very strong national coalition that's working to get more support around these bills, but any help on the state level, if you are talking to your representatives, talking to them about this legislation is always really helpful. So that would be another recommendation.
Yep, the National Coalition is kind of methodically going to different offices and asking them to co-sponsor, but hearing directly from constituents always helps. So if you have just a minute to send them a quick email asking them to be on a co-sponsor, if they're not already on the bills, that would be so incredibly helpful, as Clarissa said.
Well, I think we may have addressed all of the questions that I see at this time. So we can go ahead. I want to put up our slide, the next slide, which has my and Alexis email information. I'll also put it in the chat. Actually, I think that just went to host. Let me repost that. But we would love to stay in touch after this webinar. I know the data is a lot to kind of work through and digest. So as you go through, if you do have any questions for us or want to talk more about Healthy School Meals for All, Alexis is your person. And then just general data questions, I'm also happy to help with. So we will go ahead, I think, and wrap up today's webinar, but we just wanted to thank you all so much again for joining us. We hope this information was helpful and that you can use the reports in your state, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you all.